Hello world, welcome back to the PG.biz podcast with me, your host, Brian Baglow, and the ever wonderful Peggy and Salz. Hello Peggy, how are you today?
I'm doing well, Brian. It's been a while, The team is in Seattle, right? So it's a little quiet there. I'm on the way to Mao. How about yourself?
I am currently in the east coast of Scotland. I'm overlooking the River Forth. I'm right next to the beach and enjoying what can only be described as slightly cold rain. But that's okay. The view is spectacular and it's heading for summer. We have the same summer every year. It's one afternoon and then we can get on and start preparing for winter. So we're all good. We're all happy. Our expectations are set.
So it's predictable. It's something regular, which is our podcast. We are weekly and we are keeping a fantastic cadence, I have to say. So, like a high five to us.
Absolutely. Well, there's so much going on in the world of mobile games, and we've started to reach our tentacles into other areas like Web3, the metaverse, AI, and so on. So, there are just so many fascinating people out there. And today, I'm delighted to say, ladies and gentlemen, people of the internet, is no exception.
Absolutely. We've got someone who I would say that's even a better segue than I thought, because she does so much. And I've seen her so many places. I've seen her at PG events, and here she is. And she's going to tell us about that as well, because Martine Spaans is our guest, and she started her career in online gaming back in 2006, right? When Flash browser games were booming, Brian. Since that time, she's worked with more than 1,000 game developers in various stages of her career. In 2013, she founded Tamalaki Games to publish casual games on mobile. And in cooperation with the partner company FGL, she brought several hidden object and match 3 titles to the top of the app stores. And since one job is clearly not enough for this woman, she is also the general manager of the Dutch Games Association since 2022, something we're going to be speaking about. And a fun fact you won't read on LinkedIn, an obsession with cars. So Brian, we usually ask our guests their favorite game, but I have to do it. I have to ask your favorite car of all time.
Well, I mean, I'm biased because I own one, but that will be the 1974 Aston Martin V8, which is an absolute pleasure to drive and beautiful to look at. Not so much fun to work at, and there's always a lot of work to be done with these old British cars. And, yeah, it's the love of my life.
So, Martine, it's a pleasure to welcome you. Thank you so much for joining us today. As Peggy said, a very well-known face through the PGC network and the events that we run. But also you've been doing so much across the board really, and free to play and now moving into to Web3. But let's start sort of on the big picture in terms of the Dutch Game Developers Association. What's the community like in the Netherlands? Is it growing? Is it thriving? What are the sort of the specialities of the region, as it were?
Yeah, I would say it is growing. So one of the kind of fun trends there to see is every 2 years a report is brought out, a Games Monitor by the Dutch Game Garden, and you can really see a trend like following the reports of the last 10 years. Whereas 8 to 10 years ago there was really a lot of startups, and then about 4 years ago or something, you really saw a lot of hiring. So a lot of companies were growing. And now with the latest report, you really see that the revenue is growing a lot. So that's a logical trend, startup growth phase, and then the phase of big success. So I'm very happy to see that trend in among like the Dutch studios. There's about 550 studios now registered in the Netherlands. I mean, all sizes, that goes from freelancers all the way up to like Guerrilla Games, which is the biggest studio in the Netherlands. So there's really, there's a big representation all across the board.
That's incredible. And in terms of hubs, where are the sort of the hotspots for games in the Netherlands? Where should we be taking the PGC roadshow? Is what I'm asking.
There's not really like one specific hotspot. Utrecht has always been good in terms of studio representation there, and that's also because of the HKU university there that offers several programs in terms of the game development. So a lot of students that roll out of there start a studio there as well. But for example, also when you look at Breda, thanks to initiatives like Breda Game City, the amount of studios there is also really growing, and they're getting some great support there from the local governments. And of course, Amsterdam, Rotterdam, The Hague. I mean, the country is so small. Like you can hop from one city to another in like half an hour tops. So it also makes it really easy to just settle down your studio wherever you want and still be connected to the rest of the studios.
How do you find it wearing the two hats with your own business or indeed your own businesses and the developers association? Do you find it actually kind of you get that synergy?
Yeah, I have to say there's not sort of a lot of overlap immediately between it because with my own game publishing, I mostly work with studios outside of the Netherlands. So, for example, I work with a studio in Seattle, one in Poland, one in Indonesia, but currently not working with any studios in the Netherlands. So there's not sort of an overlap there, but of course there is a synergy when you look at the things that studios are challenged with. So like some of the typical things that studios are struggling with, and then it's just wonderful to also be in touch with the Dutch community and to sort of rely on their hive mind.
So one thing you get to do in the position you are is you get to make a strong case for games. And I think that's also necessary because Netherlands has a bit of an interesting view of games, a bit of a divide. Can you tell us a little bit more about that?
When you look at sort of the development of the Dutch game industry in the Netherlands over the past 20 years, there's always been a strong representation of serious game studios. Serious games or applied games, those terms are kind of used both to describe the same thing. But yeah, there's always been sort of a thriving sector there. But obviously, when you look at the size of the representation of entertainment game studios, there's a larger representation there. The Dutch Game Association was founded in 2008, and like in the history of it, it's gone a bit like from one side to the other. Where first there was more of a focus on serious games, and then more of a focus on entertainment games. But I think it's really important to balance it out and represent both sides and really sort of hear what their needs are and try to help them thrive as much as possible.
So I have to ask as a follow-up, I'm looking at different research around the world. I just looked at research from MENA, what are the challenges that games companies, developers, indies in particular face there? Does come back to funding, but it goes beyond that to things like marketing know-how. What are the challenges in the Netherlands?
In the Netherlands, I think funding is one of the challenges, and also because of the competition that we see from other countries. Just for example, looking at our neighbors, in Germany, there's a 70 million game fund, and in Belgium, there's a 15 million game fund. So that helps the studios there to really sort of build out better and greater products. And in the end, it's the developers also from the Netherlands who do need to compete with these products. So the fact that there's currently no government funding or no government support in the Netherlands for game studios, that I think is making things slightly more challenging. And on the other hand, it's also a risk for the Dutch game industry because, thanks to sort of the borderless system within the EU, in the EU, what is stopping a Dutch game studio to say like, you know what, I'm going to register my company in Germany and then get some of that game fund over there. So yeah, one of the big things that we're also trying to accomplish with the Dutch Games Association is really to talk to our government and basically lobby for a game fund. It's going to be a very long and slow process, but we're already making some great progress.
Let's talk about your companies, about your businesses. If that's okay, because how did you get started in the game sector? And what was your first organization?
I first worked for Spill Games. Nowadays, Spill Games is part of Azerion. But yeah, back then, when I started, it was a relatively small company. I think it was employee number 25. They already had a network of game portals, so basically just game websites where you could play Flash games for free, and then their revenue model was the advertising that they showed. And it sounds a bit strange, but as I came in as employee number 25, they were like, oh yeah, we need someone to like actually be responsible for the games. Because so far that was at that point at the company something that was just like handled by, a little bit by this person, a little bit by that person. There was no one sort of really responsible and making sure there was constantly a new flow of games coming. And when I started, it was still a little bit like Wild West. Basically a big part of my day I filled with just like, like combing through the internet for games that we didn't have yet on our websites, and basically just copying, pasting them on our website. And it sounds a little bit like stealing, but you got to realize that all those games had their own advertising built into the game as well. So actually, we helped them to sort of distribute, get a bigger reach, and gain more from their ad revenue. And of course, in the years after, that sort of cleaned up a lot more, and it became a lot more of the business model to actually license the games, get the advertising from the developer out. Only have sort of our own Spill Games advertising in there, and then that became the model. So that's when I sort of the role grew from a game manager into a licensing manager. And in that time, I was licensing up to like I think in my busiest year there, I think I licensed about 500 games in that year. Wow. But we're talking about small Flash games. We're obviously not talking about sort of these huge AAA titles. But yeah, still, I can say that I was keeping busy. But that definitely laid sort of the foundation for my knowledge, also for what gamers really like. Because when there's all these games that you're licensing, you're analyzing how well they're being played, you kind of get a good feeling for kind of what makes the player tick and what doesn't.
So you went from there and moved on, and eventually, hey, you have your own games company. You are a games publisher, deeply into free-to-play. Tell us more about Tamalaki and how you got there from where you started.
How I got there also basically links back to that period that I was at Spill Games, because like part of the licensing that I did went through a platform called FGL, and FGL was short for Flash Game License. So you can kind of see what their business model was. They were kind of a marketplace for developers and publishers. So I already knew those guys quite well just from working with them. And like fast forward to 2012, 2013, they were also kind of transitioning into the mobile market, and they were setting up their own platform for making it sort of easier for developers to publish games on the app stores. And they quickly realized, like, if we want to make this successful, we really need someone with publisher experience to kind of act as a middleman. That's when they reached out to me and they said, like, well, would you like to sort of become a mobile game publisher using our tool set, sort of using our backend? And to me, that seems like sort of a really good kind of a good way to set up my own company, with kind of seeing FGL as a safety net in a way, because they were taking care of so much, and like because of that, I had to sort of invest less in my own resources to start it all up. So yeah, that worked out pretty well, and also. Just looking at that also evolved so much. In 2013, we just published games kind of the way that we were used to with the Flash games, as in, create a hidden object game with 20 or 30 levels, put some ads in there, and, the user can finish the game in about 2 hours, and then they wait for the next game to come out next week. And that worked. That worked out quite well. And, if people wanted to remove those annoying ads, they could pay $1 and just like play it like that. So we held that model up for a couple of years, but then obviously things started going towards the free-to-play side already. So that's when we also pivoted to creating larger projects, basically with endless gameplay, lots of updates in the whole live ops model. And we've had some pretty successful titles with hidden object, match tree, and time management, as free-to-play games.
What are your most successful games to date through the company?
So some of the most successful ones were Hidden Object Mystery Society, where it's more of a detective theme, hidden object game, where you explore, really a lot of locations. I think if you want to finish the game, you have to like put in at least like 200 hours or something to unlock everything. There's really sort of a lot of content in that game, and that's also why we saw that people kept on playing it for 2 years or more. The other one that's done really well is the Home Designer Blast. It's kind of a color block blasting game with a meta game where you design homes for your clients because you are a home designer. This was all sort of in the boom of games like Design Home, and obviously we were lifting along a little bit with their success to really also release a game with a meta gameplay like that. But that's also been doing really well, and we integrated things like design contests and kind of a little of a multiplayer element there. People have been really sort of enjoying playing these contests as well.
What I like about your career, Martine, is that it sort of like mirrors the game industry. It's like a microcosm of that, because you start off where you are, you go to Tamalaki as a games publisher, and hey, now with FGL getting into Web3, what is that about, and how are you bringing your experience, your talent, these traits to Web3?
Yeah, it's and I do think it's important to also move with the market and not stay sort of too stationary for too long, because in a fast evolving industry like ours, it's also a way of survival. But yeah, we got into Web3 around 2021, right before like the big Web3 boom started, where Axie Infinity was all over the news and such. During that summer, we were already kind of looking into it, and we knew some people working for the Wax blockchain, and through them, we also started getting more interested in like what it was all about and what the current state of the space was. And we were kind of interested because they were saying like, well, there's a lot of players here eager for games, but there's currently not really a lot of good games out there yet. A lot of the games on the platform were so far still like really clickers, and without really a lot of sort of gameplay interaction. So that kind of got us, it was intriguing to us to see if we could actually build a fun game, taking into account all these sort of, Web3, the Web3 economy and how important that is for game design to work well. The problem that we saw also with a lot of games is basically that they were a little bit designed like a pyramid schedule. And we found it really an interesting challenge to see if we could come up with a game where the game economy is circular. And our free-to-play experience really sort of came into play there, where, of course, with a free-to-play design, you're also working on trying to balance out sort of the fun that the player gets, also with the rewards that they're getting. And sort of we used some of the things that we learned there to also put that into our Web3 games. So we have 3 games out now on the Wax blockchain. The first one that we published in February 2022. Yeah. So it's a little over a year old now. That was Cosmic Clash, and it's basically a PvP space battler where the strategy is in how you line up your ships, and then there's an auto battle happening against the lineup of another player. The second one that we launched also about a year ago, it was Mecha World, where it's a post-apocalyptic world where only robots survive. So the first race that we introduced was robot dogs. And there it's a bit of a mining resource game, but that's like a smaller part of the game. That's how you basically find new parts to build onto your robots. But the real gameplay is in battles where we're going to introduce several types of battles. The first one is a dice gameplay, or dice battles. And the second one is on its way, that will have a little bit more of a turn-based battle style as we're used to from other games. And the third one, Outlaw Troopers, is also a real-time PvP space battle, where I think it was one of the first games on the Wax blockchain to really introduce real-time gameplay, where a lot of the PvP was turn-based. Same was with Cosmic Clash and Mecha World. But with Outlaw Troopers, we showed that something real-time can also work within a game that is relying on blockchain technology. On our Web3 journey, we also, as you can hear, decided to take the role of a publisher, developer publisher, because of course the first game that you put out there, there's a lot you have to learn. So you better sort of develop that game in-house. So you can basically take everything that you learn from that and then apply it to the other games that you publish with the help of game developers. And sort of get them started into the Web journey if they're interested into that. And all the games are, they do have some interoperable assets. That's also the big advantage of having multiple games there, just that you publish yourself, because then you can actually deliver onto that promise that people are talking about from Web3 games. There's all this talk about having a sword in one game and then using it into another game. That's all fun, but it only works if the developer behind those games is actually making that possible. So, with our network of developers that we work with now, we can actually establish things like that and making that possible. And all the games also operate on the same token. So the FGL token, you could say like, hey, I'm going to earn some tokens in Cosmic Clash with my battles, but then I want to spend them in Outlaw Troopers to sort of strengthen my fleet there. So that's also how we sort of make it more interesting for players to dive into the economy, because it's not just bound to one game, but it's like bound to our whole portfolio of games. And yeah, that started on Wax, but currently we're also looking into expanding that to other blockchains, because Wax is obviously just one of the whole network of blockchains. And there's more bridges being built and basically more interoperable networks made possible. And I think that's also where we're going to see a lot of expansion through the rest of the year.
It's always nice to hear somebody who's taking kind of proactive approach to Web3, because, as you can imagine, we get a lot of comment and opinion on the Pocket Gamer site, and there seems to be a fairly sizable faction who have decided that Web3 has no value without having, seen it in action or had a chance to play it. So it's wonderful to hear about a company that's not only taking a chance on a single game, but is bringing a lot of the benefits out in terms of, as you say, having that catalog where you do have that interoperability and transfer opportunity. So that's rather cool.
Yeah. Yeah, I've heard people say about Web3 that, on blockchain, that basically it's a solution looking for a problem. And I don't disagree with that. But what we saw there that, blockchain is also, it's an audience looking for a way to interact with new technology. And we figured, why not sort of through our games and make it sort of a fun thing to do. It is a completely different audience. Of course, there's some crossover between gamers and blockchain gamers. But I wouldn't say it's the majority. I think a majority of the people who are interested in blockchain gaming are people who are generally interested in forms of investment and economy, and trying to sort of justify their time spent online. And none of our games are really geared towards earning, because I think the whole sort of play to earn is not something that can be very sustainable. So we kind of market our games more as play and own. But if you are very active in the game and if you do compete in the tournaments, then there's a very high success rate that you can get your investment back. So in that way, it's just like a fun pastime that doesn't really have to cost much. And that's something where morally it's something, a position that we feel very comfortable with.
New mechanisms, new models, that takes some lobbying, but hey, that's what you do, right? You do that in the Games Association with the Netherlands. So maybe you've brought some of that over, but share how you've been able to not just think of these new models, but get everyone on the same page to say, yeah, let's try this out.
Yeah, and there's definitely, like you say, being involved with development on this new technology and basically being on the forefront of it does help with sort of seeing where we should steer the Dutch Games Association in our talk with local governments. I think that's also sort of the disconnect that we have with the government right now, just like jumping back to the Dutch Games Association, where these people, they're not gamers, just the people in office, and they don't sort of fully understand what sort of the benefit of games can be and what it can sort of bring to society. So also having like ourselves directly being from the game industry and operating studios in the game industry and having that direct experience helps us to really sort of translate that better towards the government. One of the simple things that it also comes down to is like the definition of what is a game. I think a lot of people who do not play games themselves only see, for example, Call of Duty as a game and Fortnite. And those are things that they've heard of because they read the headlines about it. What they don't realize is that playing a digital crossword puzzle is also a game, or being addicted to a game like Candy Crush is also a game. Through my time as Tamalaki, I also did a lot of presentations at game conferences about designing games for non-gamers, because the target audience that I was going for with my games at Tamalaki were also basically people who do not call themselves gamers. And in a sense, that also helps with sort of this approach towards the government, and explaining to them that games are so much more than just something that is being played by 16-year-olds in their basement, and that games are really sort of an important part of life, and also for the next generation. Because we can only approach it basically from our own perspective, but when you really look at the younger generation, games are such a big part of their life, not just for entertainment, but also, for example, for communication with their friends. When I see my nephew playing Roblox, he's not really doing much in Roblox, but he is at the same time, he has his Discord open to chat with his friends. And Roblox is just sort of a means of providing a sort of like a playground for communication. I think it's hugely underestimated basically how the next generations are operating with online worlds, and how they are making use of it to really sort of be part of their lives.
We need to be in front of the government of the world and saying we have to have a seat at the table. We need to be hearing our voice when it comes to education, when it comes to healthcare, when it comes to social inclusion, because this is the way, as you say, it's the youth of the world are working, interacting, playing, finding out so much. And it's all kind of emerging from games. We touched on Web3 and of course the metaverse earlier, and pretty much everything coming into that world is of games or from games. So yeah, I think you're absolutely right. It's something that we really need to kind of champion more effectively.
Yeah, absolutely.
It also makes me think for a moment, Brian, when she was talking about games for non-gamers. I mean, through COVID, I hate to always talk about that, but it was seismic. It's a shift, and it has changed everything. And that's exactly what happened. People who weren't gamers became gamers. And that was a massive shift. And everyone was sort of, what do I do with my time? And that has changed it all. And so it's really about not games for gamers, it's games for all.
And one of the things, Martine, you mentioned hidden object games. You mentioned, a lot of the games that kind of emerged from the Flash market. Even back when Flash was kind of state of the art in terms of online games, the reality was outside the console market, the vast majority of gamers were female and over the age of 30. And again, that tends to get lost in the mix. So we've always had this enormous global audience. But again, I think the perception is it's just the consoles, it's just the paid, the commercial side of the market. And it really has ignored so much else that has happened outside our own little sort of perception of the industry. So, I think you've clearly been there from the outset, but it's great to hear it articulated.
Yeah, and like you say, it's nothing new, because I do remember also studies from 12, 13 years ago where they were saying oh, the majority of people playing games online are women. Shocking. And you still sometimes see reports like that. And I was like, well, how can this still be shocking? It was already like that 13 years ago.
Martine, thank you so much. It's been an absolute pleasure speaking to you. And we could go on. There are so many things I feel we've just barely scratched the surface, but sadly, we're going to have to bring things to a close. But it does mean that we have a perfect excuse to invite you back again to come and speak to us at some point in the near future.
Thanks, my pleasure.
Our pleasure, honestly. It has been a total joy. So before you go, we have a couple of questions that we tend to ask our guests, because we know our listeners are massive gamers, as are we all. And so we like to ask two questions. One is, what's your favourite game of all time? And the second one is, what are you playing right now that's kind of obsessing you?
My favorite game all time, no question about it, is Legend of Zelda: Link to the Past. So the SNES one. Second place would be Ocarina of Time, really. And I have to admit immediately, I have not bought the new Zelda yet. It just came out this week. I haven't bought it yet, but that's something definitely on my to-do list. Finally, what I'm playing right now, I'm not really playing anything right now on my console, but on mobile, I have been playing Merge Mansion for quite a bit. I really like the balancing of that game, and you know how it is in the game industry. You start playing a game because you want to study it, but then some of the good ones you just get hooked into, and you find yourself still playing it months later.
It's massively popular for a reason, and it is because it's really well designed. It's the balance is lovely, and who can argue with Zelda? So some fabulous answers, and then obviously we know it's your favourite car, and it's an Aston Martin. So if you couldn't be any cooler by loving Zelda and Merge Mansion, you became cooler because you're essentially James Bond. So
I'll take that.
Well, Martine, it has been a delight to have you here. And on top of it, your cool factor has risen sort of astronomically, or you're through the roof already. So all the more reason to thank you for sharing, but also thank you for our future date as well.
Thanks for having me. It's been really fun, and I already look forward to the next one.
This show is all about how to do your job better, how to make an amazing game, how to market it, and you have a say. So if you have a story or know someone we need to shine a light on, then we would love to hear from you.
We want to hear from you. We want to reflect the reality of the mobile games market in all its wonderful complexity and strangeness. So if you have any suggestions for us, if you have any feedback for us, you can always get in touch. You can email us at podcast@pocketgamer.biz. You can find us on Twitter @PGBiz, and you can reach out to us through the pocketgamer.biz website. If you're interested in listening to all of our podcasts, you can find them at pocketgamer.biz/podcast, and we would love to hear your thoughts on future shows.
And we've got you covered on all the major platforms, so subscribe to the audio podcast, as Brian said. Look for us on YouTube. If you want to read it, hey, you can do that too, because we have a companion post for you as well on the pocketgamer.biz website.
Tune in again for the next edition of the pocketgamer.biz podcast, and we look forward to speaking to you in the near future. Until then, I'm Brian Baglow.
I'm Peggy Salz, and that's a wrap until next week.